Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The men leaned in, their voices sharp, their hands slicing the air above the spread-out maps and satellite images. Their words clashed like metal on metal, entry points, fallback lines, fields of fire. Each opinion louder than the one before it, each claim pressed with the urgency of those who had been heard all their lives. She sat at the far end, half in shadow, her chair a little back from the table as if space itself conspired to keep her apart. Her hands rested still, her gaze steady. She traced the map with her eyes, seeing what they missed, and yet no one asked her, not once. The overhead lights hummed faintly. Rain pressed against the windows in steady taps, a sound that seemed louder in her silence. She pulled her sleeve once, almost absent-mindedly, brushing her fingertips against the faded cloth of her army shirt. It wasn't new. It wasn't fresh. It bore the wear of years. The stitching at the cuff was fraying, and inside that fabric lived memories that still weighed more than the gear stacked in the corner. The squad leader, a man built like iron, barked questions, pointing to sectors and grids. Others answered in turns. A younger soldier cracked a nervous joke, drawing laughter, though it died quickly. No one laughed with her. No one even looked her way. If they noticed her at all, it was as if she were another piece of furniture in the room, functional, silent, forgettable. But silence was an absence. Not here, not with her. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes catching on a line drawn thick across the map. A river crossing. To the rest, it was just a route, one path among many. To her, it was something else entirely. She saw the way the terrain shifted, the subtle bends that could conceal or betray. A detail, small, dangerous. She inhaled softly, ready to speak. But then she stopped. Timing mattered. She had learned that over and over. Speak too early and you'd be brushed aside. Speak too late and lives would be lost. The line between those two moments was thin, razor-sharp. So she sat back, let her breath slip out quietly, and folded the knowledge inside. For now. They thought she was invisible. She let them. Because invisibility had its power. What none of them knew, what none of them could yet understand, was that she carried something into this mission that no briefing could prepare for. Something older, sharper, harder than any strategy. Something she hadn't told them. Not yet. The clock ticked on the wall. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed shut, echoing like a warning. At dawn, the mission would begin. The rain had shifted to mist by the time they boarded the helicopter. She walked last, her boots sinking slightly in mud, her pack a familiar weight pressing into her shoulders. The others moved in a pack of laughter, half bravado, half fear disguised as confidence. One soldier kept adjusting his rifle strap, fumbling with it until frustration showed in his jaw. She stepped close, her hand reaching out without thought. Her fingers brushed the strap into place, quick, sure, wordless. His eyes flicked to hers, startled. For the first time he looked at her, not past her, not through her, but at her. His mouth opened slightly, a thank you forming. She shook her head once. Not now, save it. He nodded, embarrassed. She kept walking. The helicopter was a beast waiting to be fed, its blades cutting the air in furious rhythm. Inside, the cabin rattled with steel and noise, the smell of aviation fuel sharp enough to sting. She slid into her seat against the cold wall, her body sinking into the vibrations that shook through every bolt and rivet. Around her, men shouted small talk to one another over the roar. Some joked, some chewed on nerves. She stayed still. Her eyes closed, but only for a breath. In her chest pocket, hidden against her heart, was a folded photograph. Its edges worn, corners bent from being opened and refolded too many times. She didn't look at it now. She didn't need to. She knew every line of that face, every curve of that smile. A ghost she carried with her, a promise she refused to break. She remembered the call she hadn't answered, the message left unread, a moment she thought could wait until it couldn't. By the time she came home, it was too late. Guilt had become her shadow since then, a weight she could not drop. The only way she knew to carry it was here, in silence, in missions, in watching over others so no one else had to bury the same regret. She opened her eyes again, steady. The photograph remained unseen, like her. The helicopter jolted. They were descending. The ground rushed up, mud splattering, rotors throwing debris into chaos. The men spilled out first, rifles up, eyes darting. She followed, slower but sharper, her boots sinking deep, her gaze cutting the tree line. The landscape greeted them with silence, ruins of buildings, smoke rising faint in the distance, earth scarred by violence. The squad leader gave hand signals, crisp and fast. They moved. She kept her pace, her rifle smooth against her shoulder, her eyes scanning everything. Not one branch, not one shadow, not one broken piece of glass escaped her notice. Hours passed in strained silence. Through fog-heavy woods, across streams whispering beneath their boots, past fields where wind carried the stench of burnt metal. The men muttered under their breath. One cursed at the mud. Another joked about home. They filled the space with sound because silence was heavy, silence was dangerous. But she stayed in it. Silence was her terrain. Silence told her things sound could not. One of them limped after a fall, she noticed. Another flinched at thunder rolling across the hills, mistaking it for artillery. She noticed. She carried these things quietly, cataloged them like ammunition, not for herself but for them. Someone had to. Night fell like a curtain. They found cover in a broken village, walls crumbling but still standing enough to guard them. They built a small fire, low, cautious. The flames flickered across faces drawn tight with fatigue. They ate in silence at first, each man turning inward. She sat apart, sharpening her knife. Not because it needed it, but because the rhythm kept her steady. Metal against stone, soft scrape over and over. A ritual more than a necessity. One of the men finally looked at her. "Why don't you ever talk?" The others glanced over, curious, wary. It wasn't accusation, more confusion, maybe even unease. She paused, lifted her eyes from the blade. They waited. "What is there to say?" she asked softly. The fire cracked once, sharp. Silence swallowed the answer whole. They didn't push further. They never did, but something shifted. Respect, maybe, or at least recognition. She lowered her gaze back to the blade, but inside something warmed. Not much, just enough. The night stretched long. She lay with her back to a wall, half awake, listening. The snores of men, the pop of cooling embers, the whisper of wind through broken beams. But then something else. A sound too deliberate, a rustle not carried by wind. Her body tensed, breath shallow. Her hand slid toward her rifle. Her eyes narrowed into the dark. And there it was. A shadow where no shadow should be. Her pulse slowed, not quickened. Calm spread through her veins like ice. They thought she was invisible. They thought her silence meant absence. But tonight, that silence would be the thread holding them all together. She raised her rifle, sighting into the dark. And in that moment, before the first shot, before the first shout, she knew everything was about to change. She steadied her rifle, finger light on the trigger, her breathing controlled. The night pressed in from every side, thick and heavy, but her eyes stayed locked on that one unnatural movement, a shadow where none should be. She didn't call out, didn't alert the others. Words would waste time, draw attention. Instead, she shifted her weight, sliding silently along the wall until she had a better angle. The fire was dying, its glow faint, but enough to reveal outlines if you knew how to look. And she did. A figure, low, moving slow, careful, testing. Her chest tightened, not with fear but with recognition. She had seen this pattern before. Someone probing, circling, looking for weaknesses in the dark. The memory hit her fast, another night, another village, years ago. She had been younger then, less certain, her voice ignored when she warned of movement. They hadn't listened. By dawn, half the team had been gone. She would not let history repeat. She raised the rifle, her cheek resting against the cold metal. The figure froze as if sensing the sightline. Silence stretched thin. For a heartbeat, even the wind seemed to stop. A crack split the night, quick, sharp, controlled. Her shot found its mark. The camp stirred instantly. Men sat upright, fumbling for weapons, eyes wide with alarm. "What was that?" someone hissed. She didn't answer. She kept her rifle trained outward. Another shadow moved, then another. She didn't hesitate. 2 more shots, precise, no wasted motion. "Contact, we're under attack," the squad leader barked, scrambling into position. They formed a hasty perimeter, adrenaline rushing, voices cutting through the dark. But in the chaos, none of them realized yet that she had fired first, that her unseen watch had given them seconds they might not have had. Gunfire erupted. Echoes bounced between broken walls, flashes tearing open the night. She crouched low, movements instinctive, scanning, marking, firing. Her shots weren't loud to her ears. They were measured beats, part of a rhythm she had lived in too long. A soldier near her stumbled, panic written across his face. She grabbed his vest, yanking him back behind cover before a spray of rounds cut across where he'd been standing. His eyes locked on hers, breath ragged, and in that moment understanding flickered. She wasn't invisible, not to him, not anymore. The fight lasted minutes that felt like hours. Then, as suddenly as it began, the attackers withdrew, shadows melting into the dark. The silence that followed was jagged, full of heavy breathing and pounding hearts. The squad leader paced, muttering orders, checking positions. "Everyone accounted for," he called. Murmurs of confirmation. One man grazed but alive, another shaken but whole. She lowered her rifle slowly, her hands steady despite the storm inside her veins. She could feel their eyes on her now, noticing, measuring. The soldier she had pulled to safety whispered something under his breath, but she didn't catch it. She didn't need to. The squad leader approached, his eyes narrowing. "You fired first," he said, not accusing, not praising, just stating. She met his gaze, calm. They were already here. A pause, then a nod, no more words. But the silence that followed carried something new, not dismissal, not disregard, something closer to acknowledgement. Yeah. The fire was gone now, stomped out, smoke curling faint in the damp air. They took turns on watch. She didn't sleep. Not fully. Her body stayed half-wired, half-ready, as it always did. She leaned against a wall, her rifle across her lap, her eyes tracing the horizon for movement. The soldier she had saved, his name was Cole, sat nearby, restless. His knee bounced, his fingers tapping against his weapon like a drumbeat. Finally, he spoke. "You knew before anyone else." Her head turned slightly, eyes still scanning the dark. "How?" he pressed, voice low, as if afraid to break the fragile quiet. She considered. Then, after a long pause, she answered, "You learn to hear what others ignore." He frowned, not quite understanding, but too tired to ask more. Silence fell again. She glanced at him once, brief. He was young, too young. His eyes carried the look of someone trying to convince himself he wasn't afraid. She knew that look. She had worn it once. Her mind pulled her backward, unbidden, to another young face, one that had trusted her, one she hadn't saved. She closed her eyes, just for a second, fighting the memory. The photograph in her pocket felt heavier. Yeah. Morning came, gray, sky heavy with clouds. They moved quickly, leaving the ruins behind, stepping into forests where the air smelled of damp leaves and moss. The ground sucked at their boots, mud pulling with each step. Birds cried overhead, startled by their presence. The squad moved in practiced formation, rifles up, eyes cutting through the green. She stayed in the middle, her gaze sweeping edges, reading the ground like a book. Footprints where they shouldn't be. Broken branches telling stories. Shadows shifting just out of place. She saw things they didn't. And again, she stayed quiet. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to measure when to speak. She had learned long ago that survival wasn't just about skill, it was about knowing when to reveal it. They reached a clearing by noon, pausing for water and breath. The men dropped packs, stretching, muttering. The squad leader studied his map, frustration etched into his face. The route wasn't matching terrain. Something was off. She approached, standing silent at his side until he noticed. He looked up, his expression guarded. "You see something?" he asked. She pointed to the tree line where the ground sloped in ways the map didn't show. "Floods changed the river. The crossing's gone. We'll have to shift east." The squad leader blinked, surprised. He glanced back at the map, then at the terrain, then at her. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, calling the others to adjust course. A ripple of recognition passed among them, small but real. She wasn't invisible anymore, not entirely.
Yeah.
By evening they reached higher ground. Wind cut sharper here, carrying scents of smoke from somewhere unseen. They set camp again, careful, quiet. Food was scarce, rations measured. The men ate quickly, voices low. She sat apart as always, her knife in hand, not sharpening this time, just holding it, feeling the weight, the balance. Cole approached, hesitant. He crouched nearby, his face drawn with something heavier than fatigue. "You ever get tired of it?" he asked suddenly. She looked at him. "Of what?" "Carrying it all, the weight, the silence, pretending like you're not, like you don't feel it." His voice cracked on the last word. He looked away quickly, ashamed. Her chest tightened. For a moment she didn't answer. Then softly, "You don't stop feeling it, you just learn to live inside it." He swallowed hard, nodding. His eyes glistened briefly before he turned his face away. She didn't reach out, didn't touch his shoulder. That wasn't her way. But her words had settled in him, she could see it. And maybe, for the first time, she felt less alone.
Yeah.
The wind shifted near midnight. She woke instantly, her body wired to changes. The air carried a new scent, smoke, heavier now, closer. She sat up, listening. The others slept, exhausted. She rose silently, rifle in hand, moving to the edge of camp. The horizon flickered. Flames, not natural, not distant, too close. Her stomach tightened. Another village, perhaps. Another night like the one burned into her memory. She clenched her jaw, breathing slow, steady. She wanted to run toward it, to see, to stop it if she could. But she couldn't. Not yet. Her mission was here with them, with these men who didn't even fully see her. Her hand brushed against her pocket, feeling the outline of the photograph. She closed her eyes briefly, whispering words only she could hear. A promise. A vow. Then she turned back toward camp, silent, her face unreadable. They would move at dawn. And she knew, whatever waited ahead, it would test them all. But more than anyone, it would test her silence, her invisibility. Because the truth was clear now. She could stay unseen forever. Or she could step into the light, risk breaking herself open, and show them who she really was. The fire on the horizon burned. The night carried its smoke into their camp. And she knew sooner or later, her silence would end. She woke before the others, though she hadn't really slept. Sleep came to her in fragments, light, shallow, broken by the sound of her own pulse in her ears. The smoke smell still lingered, drifting low across the trees, clinging to her hair, her shirt, her skin. She sat up slowly, her eyes scanning the horizon, and there it was again. The faint orange glow, distant but alive, where a village should have been quiet. She pressed her lips together, her jaw tightening. She knew that kind of fire. Accidental flames didn't burn so steady, so deliberate. Someone had set it. Someone had wanted it to last. Her hands brushed against her vest, finding the pocket, the folded photograph. Her thumb traced the crease as if she could smooth time itself. For a moment, the faces around her blurred, the men sleeping, their shoulders rising and falling with exhausted breaths. And instead, another face rose in her memory, a face she had once promised to protect. She closed her eyes, fighting it, but memory didn't obey. It came back with cruel clarity. The last time she had been too far away, the last time she had been absent when she was needed. The sirens. The news she hadn't been ready to hear. The silence on the other end of a phone call that would never again be answered. Her throat tightened. She forced her eyes open, pushed the memory back down where it lived like shrapnel. She couldn't show it. Not now, not ever. A crunch of gravel. The squad leader stirred, rising to his feet, scanning the line of trees with suspicion. He noticed her already awake, rifle balanced across her knees. Their eyes met briefly. He gave a small nod, not of thanks, not yet, but of acknowledgement. Then he turned to wake the others. Orders were sharp, practical. Pack up, move out, east toward the ridgeline, avoid the flames. No one asked what the fire was or why. Maybe they didn't want to know, maybe they already knew. They marched into the forest, mist curling around their boots. The air grew cooler, heavier. Birds scattered as they passed, wings beating frantic warnings into the sky. She kept her rifle high, eyes sharp. Every sound pressed into her chest, a code she was trained to read. The younger soldier, Cole, walked near her again. His face was pale, eyes darker than yesterday. He said nothing, but she noticed the way his hand brushed his pocket again and again, as if something inside anchored him. She wondered what it was, a token, a letter, a photograph like hers. She didn't ask. The forest broke into an open slope by mid-morning. Wind cut hard here, sharp and biting, carrying the faint echo of gunfire from somewhere unseen. The squad leader raised a fist, signaling halt. They crouched low, breaths caught in throats, listening. Distant but not far enough. A firefight, someone else out here. The men exchanged glances. One muttered a curse. Another whispered, civilians, but no one answered. Her eyes scanned the ridge, the valleys, the smoke rising faint in the distance. Something clenched inside her chest. She had seen this before. Villages burned, then the survivors caught in crossfire they didn't start. She wanted to move, to act, to check, but orders held her still. The squad leader studied his map, chewing the inside of his cheek, weighing. "We keep east," he said finally. "We're not here to fight someone else's battle." The words landed heavy. She looked at him, her jaw tight, but said nothing. She had swallowed too many arguments in her life. She knew what happened when she spoke too soon. They moved on.
Yeah.
By afternoon, the terrain grew crueler. Rocks shifted underfoot, paths narrowed into thin ledges where one wrong step would mean a fall too far. The squad slowed, cautious, bodies tense. She moved last, watching not just the path but their footing, the way exhaustion made their steps heavier, less careful. Halfway across a ledge, one man's boot slipped. His body lurched, weight pitching forward into nothing. The others froze, helpless, too far to reach. Her hand shot out. Fingers caught his vest, grip iron. Muscles screamed, her body pressed against the cliff face, anchoring them both. For a heartbeat, their lives balanced on her grip alone. His eyes widened, terror raw. "Hold," she breathed, just one word, "steady." With a grunt, she pulled, her boots grinding into rock, her shoulders screaming under the strain. He scrambled, finding footing, clinging back to safety. The others exhaled, as if they'd been holding their breath for miles. He looked at her, shaking, his lips parting as if to speak, but she shook her head once. No words, not now. They moved on, but the silence had shifted again. This time, they didn't forget her. This time, their eyes flicked back more often, checking, not her safety, but because they knew she was watching theirs.
Yeah.
By nightfall, they found cover under jagged rock overhangs. No fire this time. Too exposed. They ate cold rations, the taste of salt and metal lingering on their tongues. One man, older, sat near her. His face was lined, his eyes carrying weight that went deeper than fatigue. He rubbed his hands slowly, as if they ached more than he wanted to admit. "Used to be easier," he muttered, not to her but maybe to himself. She didn't reply. She knew better. Silence sometimes invited more truth than questions did. Sure enough, he kept speaking, his voice low, almost lost under the wind. "Had a daughter, she'd be about your age now. Always told her I'd come back, always promised. But promises don't mean much when you're half the world away." His hands stilled. "Haven't seen her in 5 years." Her throat caught. She stared at the ground, her grip tightening on her rifle. She wanted to speak, to tell him she understood more than he could ever know. But the words stayed locked inside. He sighed, shaking his head, and leaned back against stone. His eyes closed, as if sleep could drown the regret. She sat awake long after, her chest aching with a weight she couldn't release.
The
The wind howled that night, carrying voices that weren't there, screams that lived only in her memory. She dreamt, not of the mission, not of survival, but of a phone that rang unanswered, of a door she opened too late, of a voice she would never hear again. She woke with a start, her breath shallow, her fingers clutching the photograph in her pocket. She pressed it against her chest, her body curled around it as if she could shield it from the world. The others slept unaware. She sat there in the dark, her eyes burning, her silence screaming louder than words ever could.
the
Dawn broke pale, light spreading weak across the ridgeline. They moved again, bodies stiff, eyes heavy. The forest grew thicker here, the air damp and cloying. Every sound seemed magnified, the drip of water, the crunch of boots, the whisper of wind through branches. She stayed sharp, her eyes scanning, her ears tuned to rhythms no one else seemed to hear. Then something froze her mid-step. A sound, a faint cry, distant but real. Her breath caught. She raised a hand instinctively, though no one saw it. The squad leader barked for movement, but she stayed still, head tilted, listening harder. There it was again, softer, fragile. A child's cry. Her chest tightened violently. She looked at the leader, at the men. None of them reacted, they hadn't heard it. Her hand pressed against her pocket, against the photograph. Her pulse hammered. She had a choice. Ignore it, follow orders, keep moving. Or step out of silence, risk breaking everything and speak. The cry came again, cutting through the trees like a blade. And she knew, this time she couldn't stay invisible. She opened her mouth. Her voice, when it came, was low but firm. "There's someone out there." The men froze, startled. They stared at her as if hearing her for the first time. The squad leader frowned, skeptical. "What?" She didn't flinch. "A child, east, maybe 200 meters, I heard it." The others exchanged glances, doubtful, but her eyes didn't waver. For the first time, her silence had cracked wide open. And with it, the mission was about to change. Why did the storm outside feel calmer than the storm inside her chest? The rain lashed against the hangar roof like shrapnel, a steady percussion that echoed through the cavernous space. The others moved about with practiced efficiency, loading crates, checking weapons, adjusting gear. But she stood at the edge, her hands resting lightly against the cold steel of a container, her body perfectly still. Nobody noticed her pause. Nobody asked if she was all right. Maybe that was the way it had always been. But tonight, silence carried weight. A mission briefing had ended less than an hour ago, and though her name had been spoken only once, the plan depended on her more than anyone seemed willing to admit. She felt the tension of being needed but unseen, the paradox of her existence in this unit. And maybe that was why her thoughts kept circling back to the past, to the one moment she wished she could erase, yet carried like a scar carved into bone. She had lost someone, a sister in arms, though not by blood, and every time the rain fell hard enough, she remembered the sound of it that night, mixing with screams, mixing with silence. She wondered if the others ever saw it on her face. Probably not. She had trained herself to keep her expression as unreadable as her presence, just another shadow. One of the younger soldiers, Ramirez, passed by with a nervous smile. He was barely 23, trying too hard to look confident, his hands betraying him with a subtle shake. "You ever get used to it?" he asked, his voice low, almost embarrassed. She blinked, turning her head toward him slowly, as if deciding whether he meant the storm or the mission. "Not really," she replied after a pause, "but you learn to carry it differently." Ramirez nodded, chewing on her words as though they carried more weight than he expected. He didn't ask her to explain. He just walked on, shoulders hunched, disappearing into the blur of motion. But in that brief moment, she felt the invisible thread again, binding them in ways nobody would admit. The storm outside deepened, the sound swelling into something like a warning. She lifted her eyes toward the hangar door, watching lightning flash across the horizon. It wasn't just weather, it was atmosphere. The kind that crept into bones, the kind that whispered of something coming. And though she wouldn't say it aloud, she felt it. The mission wouldn't go the way they hoped. Her commander's voice broke her thoughts. "We move in 30. His tone was clipped, efficient, his eyes skimming over the group like a man cataloging tools rather than people. He didn't glance at her. Not once. She wondered if it was intentional or if she had simply learned to live in his blind spot. She checked her gear anyway, quietly, methodically. The sniper rifle slid into its case like an old friend. The sidearm sat snug at her hip. She ran her hands along the straps, the weight familiar, grounding. But beneath it all, she could feel the question rising. Why was she still doing this? Was it duty? Was it vengeance? Or was it the simplest truth that she didn't know how to stop? As the team gathered near the transport, she slipped into formation. No one spoke her name. No one asked her opinion. Yet when the map flickered on the screen and the objective glared back at them, a remote compound nestled deep in hostile terrain, it was her hands, her eyes, her silence they would rely on when the night closed in. The hum of the engines swallowed their voices as they boarded. She took her seat near the rear, her gaze fixed on the storm fading into darkness beyond the open ramp. The rain had stopped, but the air carried that heavy, electric weight, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She rested her head against the steel wall, closing her eyes for just a second. And then, unbidden, the memory came back. A face pale in the moonlight, a hand slipping from hers, the silence afterward deafening. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to breathe. Not now. Not here. She couldn't afford to let them see the crack beneath her surface. She had built her place in this unit on invisibility, on being the shadow, the steady hand no one acknowledged but everyone leaned on when it mattered. And maybe that was enough. The engines roared louder. The ground fell away. And as the city lights vanished beneath them, she opened her eyes to the black expanse stretching ahead. A mission waited. Choices waited. Somewhere beyond that horizon, she would be asked again to do the thing nobody else could. And when the moment came, would they finally see her? Or would she remain what she had always been? The presence no one named, the thread holding them together without ever being recognized. The question hung in her chest, unanswered, as the transport plunged deeper into the night. Why was it always the waiting that cut deepest? The silence before a mission had its own kind of violence. It gnawed at nerves, stretched seconds into hours, and turned every thought into a blade. She sat in the transport's dim interior, the vibrations of the engines running up through the soles of her boots, her back pressed against cold steel. Around her, men and women checked gear, muttered short words, tugged straps, loaded magazines. But between those sounds lived something else. Fear. Not loud, not obvious. Fear always moved quietly, like smoke curling into corners. She felt it because she had trained herself to notice what others missed. A hand trembling slightly as a soldier tied down his pack. A breath held a fraction longer than normal. A stare fixed too firmly on the floor, as though looking away from the map might undo the mission ahead. She didn't join in their chatter. She never did. If anyone noticed her silence, they didn't show it. And if they did, maybe they mistook it for calm. But inside her chest, calm was the last thing she felt. She shifted her rifle case closer, fingers brushing the worn handle. That weapon wasn't just steel and scope. It was memory. It was weight. It was the last thing she held the night her partner didn't make it back. And tonight, carrying it again, she felt as though the past rode with her, not as a ghost, more like a shadow, refusing to let her forget. Ramirez sat across from her, his helmet tilted back slightly, eyes darting to her and away again. He wanted to ask something. She knew it. He had that restless energy, like a younger brother desperate for reassurance but afraid to admit it. Finally, he leaned forward just a little. "Do you ever think about what happens if—" He stopped. His voice caught in the hum of the engines. She studied him, her expression unreadable. "If we don't make it." He nodded once. His throat worked as though swallowing gravel. Her answer was slower than he expected. "I think about it every time, but I also think about what happens if we do." His brow furrowed, but her tone seemed to anchor him. Maybe he wanted her to tell him it was easy, that nothing would go wrong. But lies weren't her language. She gave him something else, the simple truth that she carried the fear too and still moved forward anyway. The pilot's voice crackled over the comms, flat and professional. 10 minutes. The words cut the air like a blade. Suddenly the chatter died, movements became sharper, more urgent. Gloves pulled tighter, goggles slid down, clips snapped shut. A kind of collective heartbeat pulsed through the cabin, unspoken but heavy. She closed her eyes for a second, letting the rhythm of the transport steady her. 10 minutes. That was all. 10 minutes to pull every fragment of herself into focus, to quiet the storm inside long enough to step into the storm outside. But her mind betrayed her, drifting again where she didn't want it to go. Back to that night. Back to her partner's voice, steady one moment, gone the next. Back to the choice she couldn't undo. She had replayed it 1,000 times, and each time she wondered, if she had spoken up, if she had acted differently, would things have changed? The commander's bark snapped her back. We land fast, no noise. We split east and west. Sniper covers from the ridge, that's you. He didn't look at her when he said it. His gaze swept over the map as though she were just a coordinate, not a person. But the weight of his words settled on her shoulders anyway. She felt her jaw tighten, not at the order, that was expected, but at the way her presence once again was reduced to function. Rifle, ridge, cover, invisible except for what she could provide. The ramp groaned as it lowered, wind tearing into the cabin. Night air rushed in, cold and sharp, carrying scents of earth and wet leaves. Shadows stretched across the terrain below, a patchwork of dark ridges and broken paths. Her boots hit the ground first. The shock of it traveled up her spine, real and grounding. She lifted her rifle, the familiar weight sliding against her shoulder. Around her, the team fanned out, shapes blending into the dark. She moved without hesitation, climbing toward the ridge line, each step silent, each breath measured. At the crest, she dropped low, the earth damp beneath her gloves. She positioned her scope, eyes adjusting, field of vision stretching wide. Below, the compound flickered with faint light, shadows of movement crossing windows, guards packing. The mission had begun. Her heartbeat slowed, her breathing leveled. Here, in this stillness, she found the strange balance between fear and focus. The world narrowed to crosshairs, to breath control, to the subtle shifts of targets unaware of the storm about to reach them. But she wasn't just watching enemies. She was watching her own. The men and women she moved with, each one carrying their own weight into the dark. Ramirez adjusting his stance, trying not to shake. The commander moving sharp, precise, almost too rigid. Others scanning corners, their bodies betraying nerves even if their faces didn't. And then something shifted, a flicker in her scope, a shadow moving where it shouldn't. She adjusted, zoomed, stilled her breath. 2 more guards than intelligence had reported. Heavier weapons, a patrol pattern different than the plan accounted for. Her pulse ticked up, but she didn't call it in yet. She waited, watched, confirmed. The information wasn't wrong, it was incomplete. The compound was prepared, more prepared than anyone had been told. She exhaled slowly, finger resting against the trigger guard. The decision pressed against her chest like a weight. Should she break silence? Should she call out what she saw, even if it unraveled the plan, even if it meant challenging the commander's picture of control? The radio crackled in her ear. All units move. Her lips parted, her throat tight. She almost spoke. Almost. But hesitation held her for just one more beat. And in that beat, the mission tilted on the edge of something no one was ready for. The storm was no longer outside. It was here, inside the compound, inside her chest, waiting to break. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her blood, that tonight would not end the way anyone expected. What made her hold her tongue? The truth sat heavy on her lips, burning for release, yet silence was the only choice she made. And silence could kill. From her position on the ridge, the compound spread out beneath her scope like a living puzzle. Guards packing, weapons slung but ready, lights flickering in windows, the hum of machinery faint in the distance. Every detail told her the same story. This wasn't just a routine outpost. It was layered, fortified, alive in ways the briefing hadn't prepared them for. Her finger hovered near the comms button, but her chest clenched tight. She could hear her own doubts, louder than the storm still whispering on the horizon. What if she spoke up and the commander dismissed her again? What if she threw the mission into chaos? And deeper still, what if she was wrong? The last time she had spoken too late, someone had died. That memory haunted every breath she took. But the last time she had spoken too soon, she had been ignored. Which failure hurt more? Her radio crackled again. Team 1 on the gate, Team 2 flank east. The commander's voice was clipped, confident, untouched by doubt. He moved men like chess pieces, but she could see the flaws in his game. And she was the only one high enough, far enough, quiet enough to notice. Her scope swept across the east wall. Two shadows slipped into the blind spot where Team 2 was headed. Ambush waiting. She inhaled sharply, held it, then exhaled, forcing the breath steady. The decision could no longer wait. Two hostiles, east wall, she whispered into the mic, her voice low but clear. For a heartbeat, there was only static. Then the commander's voice, say again. East wall, additional guards, not on intel. A pause too long. She imagined his jaw tightening, imagined his irritation at her correction. But in the silence, she saw Team 2 hesitate, adjust, avoid the blind corner. Her call had bought them seconds, precious, life-saving seconds. Gunfire broke the quiet, sharp, immediate, not theirs. The compound had spotted them. The night exploded into sound. Shouts, muzzle flashes, the rattle of automatic fire tearing through the dark. Her pulse surged, but her hand stayed steady on the rifle. She tracked, aimed, fired. One shot. One guard dropped. A second round chambered. Another target down. Below, her team scattered into cover, their voices cutting through the chaos. Ramirez's voice rose, cracking with nerves but alive. Taking fire, west corner. Another soldier called for cover, another for medics. The commander barked orders, his control fraying at the edges. She fired again, suppressing the high tower. Her ears rang, not just from the shots but from the flood of memories pressing against her skull. The last time she was pinned down like this, her partner's voice had vanished into silence. Not tonight, not if she could stop it. Through her scope, she spotted Ramirez crawling to a wall, bullets sparking inches from his helmet. She adjusted her aim, tracked the shooter, and pulled the trigger. The shot landed clean. Ramirez looked up, breathless, his gaze flicking toward her ridge. He couldn't see her, not really. But he knew. For that 1 second, he knew who had kept him alive. The fight raged on. Minutes stretched like hours. The compound wasn't giving ground easily. Reinforcements poured out from places that hadn't been on the map. Each moment confirmed what she had sensed. This mission wasn't intelligence failure. It was a trap. Her radio hissed again. The commander's tone was sharp, strained. We hold position, no fallback. Her teeth clenched. Hold. In this storm of fire, she swept her scope, saw 3 of their own pinned, one already bleeding. Hold meant die. She wanted to scream it into the comms, to break through his pride with the truth she saw in her crosshairs. But pride was a wall thicker than steel. Instead, she shifted focus. One by one, she eliminated angles. A guard lining up a shot at their medic, gone. Another setting up a heavy weapon, gone. Each kill wasn't just precision. It was defiance. Proof that her silence could no longer define her. She would not let them fall because her voice was ignored. Ramirez's voice returned, strained but fierce. We can't hold, sir. Another soldier shouted, they're closing in. Static drowned the rest. She knew the commander would cling to control even if it broke them all. She had seen that kind of man before, too rigid to bend. Too blind to see the thread holding everything together wasn't orders, it was survival. It was trust. It was her. She pressed her lips to the mic. Fall back north, cover from ridge. Her voice was calm, firm. For a breath, no one answered. She had crossed a line spoken over command. Then Ramirez's voice, copy, moving. Another voice, north, go, go. The team began to shift, breaking from the kill zone. Gunfire followed, but her shots carved space for them, cutting down threats, forcing the enemy to duck and scatter. Each bullet carried more than steel. It carried her promise that she would not let them be invisible casualties of someone else's pride. The commander's voice finally snapped through, furious. Who gave that order? She didn't answer. She couldn't waste breath on defense, not when lives still hung in the balance. She fired again, and another path opened. The retreat pulled them closer to her ridge. She watched them move, battered but alive, their silhouettes flickering through muzzle flashes. For the first time, they weren't just relying on her aim, they were trusting her direction. And in that trust, something shifted. She was no longer just a shadow at their edge. She was the thread binding their movement, the silent hand turning chaos into survival. But the fight wasn't over. The compound roared with reinforcements, lights blazing, alarms cutting the night like knives. They had escaped the worst, but the storm had only begun. And as she chambered another round, sweat slick on her palms, one truth hardened inside her. Tonight, invisibility would no longer be her refuge. Tonight she would be seen, whether they wanted to or not. What happens when the one voice you tried to silence becomes the only one keeping you alive? The question lingered in the smoke-filled air as they stumbled north, shadows breaking across the ridge where her shots carved their path. Bullets hissed, ricochets sparked against rock, the night alive with chaos. Yet somehow, through that storm of fire they moved. Because of her. Because she spoke when silence would have buried them all. She lay prone on the ridge, cheek pressed against cold metal, scope sweeping, breath locked in rhythm. Every squeeze of the trigger was deliberate. Every target that fell gave the team another heartbeat, another step toward cover. Her heart slammed against her ribs, but her hands never shook. She couldn't afford it. Not when 10 lives moved under her sightline, depending on her steadiness, depending on the thread only she could hold together. Below, Ramirez pushed a wounded soldier forward, his shoulder straining beneath dead weight. Blood darkened the man's sleeve, dripping in uneven lines, leaving a trail across stone. The medic shouted for help, but his voice cracked under pressure. "Keep moving," she whispered into her mic, her voice flat, controlled. Not a command, a lifeline. They listened. They didn't hesitate this time. Even the ones who hadn't spoken to her in weeks, who had treated her like a shadow, tonight they leaned into her words. Maybe they didn't realize it yet, but they were already bound by her presence, by her refusal to let them vanish into the dark. The commander's voice broke through, strained, furious. "Fall back to secondary point. Regroup." His tone cracked at the edges, but no one answered him. They followed her silence, her bullets, her calm against the chaos. For the first time his authority faltered, and in that falter she felt a bitter taste, relief laced with sorrow. She didn't want his failure, she wanted their survival. Her scope swept left, a muzzle flare, enemy squad emerging from the tree line cutting off the retreat. Her finger tightened, shot rang out, one man dropped. Another 2 rushed forward. She fired again, hitting center mass, but 3 more filled the gap. Her chest tightened. She couldn't stop them all, not fast enough. "Contact left flank," Ramirez shouted, panic slicing through the comms. Her teeth clenched. She pressed her lips to the mic, steadying her voice. "Take cover behind the rocks, now." They obeyed, dropping low, dragging the wounded with them, pressing into stone as the new squad's fire lit up the dark. Tracers cut through the air, bright lines across her scope. She shifted, took aim, and fired in rhythm. 1, 2, 3, but still they kept coming. Then she heard it, the sound she dreaded. The dry click of an empty magazine, her chest hollowed. For a moment, silence swallowed her. Her hands moved fast, reloading, sliding the bolt, slamming the weapon back into her shoulder. But that heartbeat of stillness had cost them. She looked down and saw Ramirez pinned. the young soldier's helmet sparking as rounds chewed into the rock above his head. His mouth moved in a prayer or a curse. She couldn't tell. Her throat tightened. Not him, not again. She adjusted, aimed high, and took the shot. The man targeting Ramirez crumpled, his weapon slipping from lifeless fingers. Ramirez's eyes shot upward, locking on the ridge. He didn't see her face, but he saw her presence, felt it in the air, and he knew. For the first time, he didn't look away. The team pressed forward, broken but alive. But the compound was awake now. Lights blazed in the distance, search beams sweeping the hills. More voices rose, shouting orders in a language she didn't need to understand. Reinforcements were pouring in. She exhaled slowly, the bitter truth tightening in her chest. They weren't escaping this without cost. Her radio hissed again, the commander's voice strained but quieter now. You saved them. Not a compliment, not thanks, just acknowledgement. She didn't answer. Words wouldn't matter, not here, not yet. As they reached the tree line, Ramirez keyed his mic. His voice was raw but steady. We're alive because of her. You know that, right? No one spoke back, but silence for once wasn't dismissal. It was agreement unspoken, a truth too sharp to deny. She lowered her rifle, the barrel smoking faintly in the cold air. The mission had shattered. The objective was gone, but the thread she had tried so hard to keep hidden was now binding them tighter than command ever could. And yet she knew the night wasn't done. The storm was only shifting. Because if the enemy had been waiting for them, if the compound had been reinforced, then this wasn't a mission gone wrong. This was betrayal. Someone had led them into it. Her chest grew heavy as the realization sank in. Betrayal wasn't just out there, behind enemy walls. Sometimes it came from within. And as she followed her team into the dark cover of the trees, she carried a new burden. Not just survival, but the question that would break them apart if they dared to ask. Who had set them up? Why did the silence feel heavier than the gunfire? The mission had ended hours ago. The world outside the wire was still spinning, still burning, still fractured. But inside the makeshift camp, inside the perimeter where shadows moved like restless memories, there was only quiet. Not peace. Never peace. Just quiet. The kind that sat on your chest until you couldn't breathe. She sat apart from the others, the glow of a lantern soft against her face. The lines around her eyes told a story that none of them dared ask about. Her hands were steady as she cleaned the rifle, but her mind wandered somewhere far beyond the steel, the oil, the precision of habit. Every scrape of the cloth whispered of loss, of choices, of a thread too fragile to hold a team together. And yet it had. They had survived. That was the miracle, that was the weight. One by one, they gathered around her, drawn not by her words but by her silence. The medic, still carrying the stain of someone else's blood on his sleeves. The comms officer, staring at the dirt as if it might swallow him. The young private, his face pale, lips trembling, pretending not to remember how close he had come to breaking. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. Her presence had become the anchor none of them realized they were clinging to. But there was something she hadn't told them. Something she carried like a wound no bandage could touch. The message that had come before the mission. The voice that had said her brother's name. The truth that he was gone. She had buried it deep inside because if she had let it surface, the mission would have fractured before it began. She had chosen silence, and silence had saved them. But silence was also breaking her from within. The lantern flickered, shadows shifted. The young private finally spoke, his voice cracking. I thought I was done out there. I thought. He stopped, words failing him, fear still clawing at his throat. She looked up, just one look, and it steadied him. You weren't done, she said softly. You chose to keep going. That's all any of us can do. The others nodded slowly, as if they needed her to say it before they could believe it. For a moment, their shoulders eased, the weight a little lighter. But when the silence returned, it was her silence they leaned on. Later, when the camp finally slept, she stayed awake. She thought about the path that had brought her here, the choices she had made, the lives that had crossed hers and been lost to the shadows. She thought about the letters she had never sent, the words she had never spoken. And she thought about her brother, his laugh, his stubbornness, the way he had always believed she was stronger than she felt. She whispered into the night, barely a breath, "I carried you with me." No one heard, but maybe that was enough. The dawn came slow, pale light stretching across the camp. The team rose with weary bones, some limping, some silent, all changed. They didn't look at her as they packed their gear, but every step, every movement seemed tied to the rhythm she had given them. She wasn't their leader. She wasn't their savior. She was the quiet thread stitching them together when everything else was tearing apart. As the helicopters arrived, blades beating the morning air, she paused before boarding. She looked back at the land they were leaving behind, scorched earth, broken walls, echoes of screams swallowed by wind. And then she looked at her team. They were tired, scarred, but alive, and they would carry pieces of each other forever. No one would ever tell their story the way it truly happened. Reports would flatten it, names would fade, numbers would replace faces, but she knew. They all knew. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And in the quiet after the storm, when the world forgets, it is the invisible threads that hold everything together. The helicopter lifted, rising above the dust. Below, the earth seemed endless. Above, the sky opened wide. She closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek, not of weakness, not of defeat, but of release. The silence remained, but this time it didn't feel so heavy. It felt like memory, like truth, like a promise she would keep carrying until the end. And that was enough.